Those are your hands? Those are your hands?
It's one of the strangest love stories ever told, but Edward Scissorhands hides way more secrets than you think. From Tom Cruise almost stealing the role to a scene so emotional it made test audiences break down. Edward Scissorhands has secrets you were never supposed to know. What really happened behind those pastel painted doors? And why did Johnny Depp call this his most personal role ever? Stick around, because these 20 hidden facts will change everything you thought you knew about this gothic classic. Fact 1. Edward Scissorhands was born from a lonely teenager's doodle.
You didn't wake up. I'm sorry.
The entire concept of Edward Scissorhands started as a simple sketch. As a teenager growing up in suburban Burbank, California, Tim Burton often felt like an outsider. To express that loneliness, he drew a picture of a thin, pale boy with scissors for hands, a character who couldn't touch others without hurting them.
Teenage impulses of the feeling of wanting to touch and wanting to communicate but not being able to, you know.
Years later, that sketch became the emotional core of Edward Scissorhands. Burton has said the story was a personal reflection of how it felt growing up as an awkward, misunderstood kid in a cookie-cutter neighborhood. Fact 2. Johnny Depp speaks just 169 words in the entire movie.
She had some ideas? Uh-huh. Did I hurt Kevin? Goodbye.
Johnny Depp's portrayal of Edward is nearly silent. He only speaks 169 words in the entire film. That sparse dialogue makes every whispered line deeply resonant, showcasing his reliance on gestures and expressions to convey emotion. In fact, director Tim Burton and screenwriter Caroline Thompson intentionally kept Edward's lines minimal to emphasize his innocence and social isolation. Depp even said he approached the role like a dog, responding more with eyes and instinct than words, making his performance haunting, vulnerable, and unforgettable. Fact 3. Tom Cruise wanted the role. Before Depp was cast, Tom Cruise was seriously considered for the role of Edward. Studio pressure led Tim Burton to meet with several A-list actors including Cruise, Tom Hanks, Michael Jackson, and Robert Downey Jr. Cruise reportedly asked questions like how Edward would go to the bathroom or eat and wanted changes to the story's tone, such as a happier ending. Burton ultimately passed, saying Cruise was interesting, but it worked out for the best and Depp got the part. Fact 4. Winona Ryder wasn't the first choice. Before Winona Ryder landed the role of Kim Boggs, the filmmakers actually considered Drew Barrymore. At the time, Barrymore was a rising star coming off Firestarter and E.T. She auditioned for the role but didn't quite fit the delicate, innocent vibe Tim Burton envisioned for Kim. Burton ultimately chose Winona Ryder, who had just worked with him on Beetlejuice and already had the kind of ethereal, outsider presence he wanted beside Depp's Edward. Fact 5. Johnny Depp fainted in the costume. During one of the first full costume fittings, Johnny Depp actually fainted while wearing Edward's tight all-leather suit and Scissorhands. The combination of Florida heat, the constricting leather outfit, heavy makeup, and limited mobility made it unbearable. Depp collapsed right in front of Tim Burton, leading the crew to tweak parts of the costume to make it slightly more breathable for filming. Even after the adjustments, Depp later said that wearing the suit felt like having a wet rubber couch glued to your body, and that the lack of ventilation made every shoot a physical challenge. Despite that, he insisted on wearing the full costume for every take to stay in character. Fact 6. Vincent Price's final film role.
I have a present for you.
Legendary horror icon Vincent Price made his final on-screen appearance as the inventor who created Edward. Price, known for classics like House of Wax and The Pit and the Pendulum, was a lifelong idol of Tim Burton, who wrote the role specifically for him. Sadly, Price was in declining health. During filming, he had emphysema and Parkinson's disease, so his scenes were shortened to accommodate him. He passed away just 3 years later in 1993. Burton said having Price in the film was like saying goodbye to a hero. Fact 7. Winona Ryder and Johnny Depp were dating in real life. The chemistry between Edward and Kim wasn't just acting. Johnny Depp and Winona Ryder were a real-life couple during filming. They had started dating a year before production began, and by the time cameras rolled, Depp had already gotten his famous Winona Forever tattoo. Their off-screen romance added an extra layer of tenderness to their characters' love story, making those final scenes even more heartbreaking. Unfortunately, the relationship didn't last, but it became one of Hollywood's most iconic young romances of the 90s. Fact 8. The neighborhood was real and was painted pastel. The eerie, candy-colored suburb where Edward is taken in wasn't a movie set. It was a real neighborhood in Lutz, Florida. Tim Burton and his production team found a sleepy residential area and got permission to repaint all the houses in surreal pastel tones like mint green, lavender, and pale pink. Even the residents' lawns were spray painted to match the artificial, dreamlike aesthetic Burton wanted. After filming wrapped, the studio returned the homes to their original colors, although fans still visit the area today. Fact 9. Tim Burton rejected a happy ending. Early on, studio executives pushed for a more upbeat conclusion to Edward Scissorhands. They wanted Edward and Kim to end up together, or at least reconnect as adults, but Tim Burton refused. He believed that Edward's isolation was essential to the story's emotional weight. According to Burton, giving Edward a happy ending would have betrayed the character's innocence and misunderstood nature. Instead, we're left with that hauntingly beautiful final image of Edward alone, carving ice in the shadows. Fact 10. The ice dance scene was Depp's favorite. That magical moment where Edward sculpts an angel from ice while Kim dances in the falling flakes, it wasn't just iconic to fans. It was Johnny Depp's favorite scene in the entire film. He later said it perfectly captured Edward's longing, creativity, and gentle soul, all without a single line of dialogue. It also became one of the most memorable visuals in Burton's entire filmography, often used in retrospectives and tributes. To make the moment feel even more dreamlike, composer Danny Elfman crafted one of his most haunting scores to date. The result is a visually poetic scene that feels like a living snow globe, a fleeting glimpse of beauty, sadness, and unspoken love. Fact 11. Danny Elfman scored the film in just a few weeks. Composer Danny Elfman, a longtime Tim Burton collaborator, wrote the film's iconic score in just a few weeks. He described the music for Edward Scissorhands as one of his most emotional and personal works. Elfman said he immediately connected with the themes of loneliness and innocence, and the music seemed to pour out of him. The ethereal choral melodies, especially in the ice dance scene, remain some of the most haunting in movie history. Fact 12. The original ending was much darker. Before settling on the bittersweet finale we know today, Edward Scissorhands originally had a much darker ending. Early drafts of the script featured Edward dying after his final confrontation with Jim. In some versions, he was hunted and killed by the mob of townspeople, but Tim Burton scrapped the idea, saying it didn't fit the emotional core of the story. Edward wasn't a monster, he was a tragic figure. Instead, Burton opted for the more poetic ending. Edward lives in solitude, creating snow for Kim from afar. Fact 13. A real storm almost shut down filming. While filming in Lutz, Florida, the production was hit by a massive thunderstorm that nearly brought things to a halt. The storm caused power outages and flooded parts of the suburban set, delaying multiple shoot days. The timing was so intense that some of the cast and crew joked the weather was trying to become part of the movie. This unexpected chaos almost derailed Burton's carefully styled suburban dream world. Fact 14. The castle was just a miniature. Edward's eerie Gothic mansion towering over the suburb, it wasn't a full-size building, it was mostly a miniature model combined with matte paintings and a few carefully built partial sets for close-ups. Tim Burton and his production team used old-school movie magic to create the illusion of a massive haunted castle on a hill. The blend of practical effects and forced perspective made it feel much larger and more surreal than it really was. Fact 15. Johnny Depp cried while watching the finished film. When Johnny Depp saw the final cut of Edward Scissorhands for the first time, he was so emotionally overwhelmed that he cried. He later said he had no idea how powerful and beautiful the film would feel once Danny Elfman's score, the editing, and the visuals all came together. Despite acting in it, Depp felt like he was watching someone else's story, one that deeply resonated with him. This moment cemented Edward Scissorhands as one of the most personal and meaningful films of his career. Fact 16. Tim Burton based the suburb on his own childhood. The strange, pastel-colored suburb in Edward Scissorhands Scissorhands wasn't just a stylized fantasy. It was directly inspired by Tim Burton's real hometown of Burbank, California. Growing up, Burton always felt like an outsider in his own neighborhood. He described it as bright, neat, and emotionally repressed, and he channeled that exact feeling into the bland conformity of the fictional neighborhood in the film. The result is a setting that feels cheerful on the surface, but cold and judgmental underneath. This personal connection is a big reason Edward Scissorhands remains Burton's most emotional and autobiographical film. Fact 17. It took about 2 hours daily to become Edward.
What happened to you? Where are your parents? Your mother?
Transforming Johnny Depp into Edward was a lengthy and grueling process. Makeup artist V. Neal and her team spent about 1 hour 45 minutes up to 3 hours each day. 1 hour for prosthetics like scars, pale makeup, and eyebrow covers, 45 minutes to sew him into the tight leather costume, plus an additional hour for hairstyling, creating that wild punk-inspired moth. Altogether, Depp endured a 3-hour ritual every day before filming began. Fact 18. A scene was cut because it made test audiences cry too much. One emotional scene was removed from the final cut of Edward Scissorhands because test audiences reportedly cried too hard. According to editor Richard Halsey, there was a brief moment where Edward returns to the Boggs house one last time, unseen, and gently leaves behind a final ice sculpture for Kim. It added even more heartbreak to the ending, but Tim Burton cut it because the emotional impact was already so strong and the extra scene was just too much. This deleted moment was never included in DVD releases, but has been discussed in fan circles and interviews. Fact 19. The film was almost called Edward the Scissorhanded. Before settling on the now iconic title, the film's working title was actually Edward the Scissorhanded, a much more awkward and literal version. Studio executives were worried that Edward Scissorhands sounded too strange or hard to market, but Tim Burton pushed back, insisting on a more poetic and fairy tale-like name. Eventually, the simpler title won out, and it's now one of the most recognizable movie titles of the 1990s. Burton later said the original version sounded like a bad children's book. Fact 20. The role of Kim revived Winona Ryder's career. At the time she was cast as Kim, Winona Ryder's career had taken a dip after some mixed reviews and box office flops. But Edward Scissorhands completely turned that around. Her performance as the gentle, conflicted Kim reminded audiences and critics of her range and helped her land major roles in Mermaids, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and Little Woman, which earned her an Oscar nomination. Ryder later called Edward Scissorhands one of the most important projects of her life, both professionally and personally. And then as a little bonus fact for the die-hard fans of the movie, the real Edward Scissorhands house is now a museum. The actual house where the movie was filmed, the pastel-colored Boggs family home, still exists today in Lutz, Florida, and has been turned into a full-blown Edward Scissorhands museum by devoted fans. The current homeowners bought it in 2020 and restored it to look exactly like it did in the film, filling it with props, memorabilia, and even recreated furniture layouts. It's now known as Scissorland and is open to visitors who want to walk through movie history. They even have the original door, hedge clippers, and an Edward mannequin inside. And that's a wrap on Edward Scissorhands, a film as strange, sweet, and unforgettable as Edward himself. From pastel suburbs to leather suits and ice sculptures, it's no wonder this gothic fairy tale still cuts deep after all these years. Subscribe for more movie secrets you never knew, and drop a comment below telling us your favorite Edward Scissorhands moment. There's always more movie magic hiding in plain sight. See you in the next one.